Hello. Welcome to April Gloaming's inaugural Sunset Salon. This will be a quarterly event that will be held around sunset on the last Sunday of the month. And I cannot tell you how grateful I am that you all are here joining us for this first session in which we are welcoming 3 April Gloaming authors. I am Christine Hall, and I will be hosting us as we hear readings and have conversation with Christopher K. Doyle, who is the author of the new novel At the Confluence. We'll also be speaking with Bernadette Geyer, author of the poetry collection What Haunts Me, and Ashley N. Roth, author of the novel We Never Took a Bad Picture. We'll begin the evening with 10-minute readings from each of our authors, and then we'll progress into a salon-style conversation where we'll offer some questions that we hope each of our authors will have answers for, and we'll have an informal sort of discussion and see where it leads us. I can't wait to hear from each of them. And I'm going to say that those of you in audience, whatever streaming platform you are tuning in on, feel free, drop a question in the comments. We're going to consider those as we move into the conversation a little later. But at this time, I invite you to settle in, close the blinds, draw those shades. We're going to have some cozy readings. It is sunset here in Nashville, Tennessee, though I realize it may not be where you are. So I hope you find a space where you can enjoy some quiet time and curl up with some poetry and some novel reading and some good conversating. Our first author tonight is Christopher K. Doyle. He most recently published At the Confluence. It was just this September. Also, Even in the Quiet Places, 2021 came from April Gloaming Publishing as well. Christopher K. Doyle grew up in Brunswick, Maryland, a small town nestled on the banks of the Potomac River, B&O Railroad, C&O Canal, and the Blue Ridge Mountains. After receiving his MFA at the University of Baltimore, he had written about the origin of country music, an embattled elementary school teacher, the C&O Canal, and the magical world of Harper's Ferry. He lives in Baltimore with his wife, daughter, and Rhodesian Ridgeback, all in a cramped row house. At the Confluence. Here's a synopsis. Hollis Pride has just drowned in the rapids fishing right below Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, where the Potomac and Shenandoah rivers meet. As he watches the police pull his body from the rocks, a girl on the muddy riverbank touches his arm and brings him to meet her dying grandmother, a woman who needs his eyes to see what death will be like, considering she's too afraid to look. Hollis obliges, giving her his eyes. In return, he's handed a candle, one that guides him as he makes his way home. And so begins the journey that unfolds over the next 3 days as Hollis meets more of the living in need of his body parts. Parts he gives away in return for something from the living, objects he gives to his wife to help her. He hasn't died the correct way, and the more body parts he gives away, the more difficult it is for him to ascend to from the world of the living. His wife, Nora, also wants something, a child. It was the one thing Hollis was never able to provide her with in life, though now in death they must both work in parallel worlds to find a child for Nora before he's forced to leave the living realm forever. And I will say that I just finished this novel. Aside from it sweeping me away, I am going to say that running through this is a profound and keen understanding of magic delivered with a delightful sense for the grotesque. And it's steeped in both nature and the supernatural, navigating the confluence of those realms effortlessly. I am so grateful and excited to welcome our first author reading with us tonight, Christopher K. Doyle. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Christine. So nice to be here. I hope people are going to have a good time with this. So I'll get right to it. At the Confluence, as Christine mentioned, two rivers meet below Harper's Ferry, and the book is kind of set up the same way. It's called a braided narrative. It's a fancy term. So there are two narratives that kind of alternate. I'm going to read the first chapter from Nora's perspective, and then the first page from chapter 2 from Hollis, her husband's perspective. So here we go. There was nothing in the air above the oak tree that Nora could see, just a sound, a rumbling hiss like when all the water drained from the kitchen sink. Yet she couldn't stop staring, couldn't hope to see anything else, any color or shape. Even all the clouds from before had dispersed, as if by mutual consent, all to let her hear the last faint instant of her dear sweet husband Holly whispering above her in the wind. Stretching out her hands, she felt for the strawberry bush. The bramble was wiry and sharp. The stickers she grasped drew the teeniest pinpricks on her fingers. She'd brought Holly's pistol with her once he had been pulled from her, apparently after he'd walked all the way home after drowning in the Shenandoah. Whispering in his ghostly way behind her, she turned to him, not understanding any of it, and watched his blue-tinged presence whisk through the kitchen window and up into the night. She'd not known a body, even a dead one, could bluster the calico drapes like that, before scattering the shattered glass at her feet. I just swept, was all she could muster, after she'd made the mistake of saying his name out loud, as if the dead were summoned like that. She wasn't sure what rules this world was working with, and found his pistol. The old Colt he'd kept for no other reason than he'd been given it by his uncle after their wedding night and told a man should be able to protect his family. It sagged in the drawer it sat these last 8 years, but now she felt its cold weight in her apron. It sagged beneath her with a heaviness she could not fathom. Not even the hissing sound above her, or the strawberry bramble she grabbed, or the ghostly terror still racing through her, could sting her back into any semblance of what she'd been, a wife, Holly's wife. Now she just felt heavy and knelt in the dirt, her forehead against the trunk. Trembling, her hands reached to touch the worn trigger to feel the sad end she knew was there, waiting for her. "'Cause I'll be able to see him," she said, and pointed the pistol at her pinched eye, as if through the rusty barrel Holly would be staring back, urging her on, to come with, to the other side. "That won't work." Nora heard the voice and looked above the oak tree, hoping Holly was still there, an eye in the dark, a presence in the highest branch, now that the clouds had returned with a rumble of thunder. "He's not there either, if you're wondering, and he wouldn't want that for you anyway." A woman in the yard pointed at the pistol. Nora could see her shadow on a bedsheet hung from the clothesline. She was tall and shapely and seemed to float a foot above the ground as the bedsheet billowed out in another gust before disappearing. The kitchen lantern had sputtered out, leaving only darkness, without any moon to see, without any light to show the way she thought she had to go. There was no way, only this, and she held the pistol to her head until she felt the lowest branches brushing her hair, calming her into this new truth. Holly was gone. The world was done, and there was nothing else to it. Turning, she slumped with her back against the tree and let the pistol sag into her lap. She'd been wrong to love him. She'd been wrong to pull further away the more the years wore on, and none of their efforts had produced the child they'd wanted. No, she couldn't think like that. She'd been right. They'd been right. As right as anything she'd ever known. They'd just been distant these last years without anyone to share their love with. When they realized Holly couldn't help her conceive, that he didn't have it in him, that ability. But he did have it in him. The voice sounded again, but was farther away and teased a knowledge Nora could not know, and still does. Looking up, she watched a light approach from the house. How do you know what he could do? As the light expanded and the woman came closer, Nora knew her at once and was drawn to the strange plumpness of her lips. "Miss Misery?" "Only my customers call me Miss Misery, and you are certainly not a customer. Call me Misericordia." "Did you see him today? Is that how you know?" "I saw him, as I see all the dead. But he was different, your Holly. He was lost in his new state, having just drowned in that awful boat. And I dare say he must have already seen a few folks on his way home, because he was missing a few parts." Nora blinked at the word, and Miss Misery smiled to see her so curious about what she must have already known, but failed to recall after the years of disappointment. "What I meant to say, he was magnanimous, generous with himself. I suppose a few other folks were drawn to him as soon as he passed." Oh, I've seen it before, how someone has to say the deceased's name so they can be whisked away before any manner of strangeness occurs. The dead walking about, looking for a way back into the rhythm of life, into the patterns they'd crossed before, and how some living folks might ask for bits and pieces of them to fill the need they have inside themselves, to fill the emptiness. Just as easy as walking into a store and asking for pie plates or pipes. Pie plates or pipes? How about eyes? Nora said. I turned and he didn't have any eyes or heart. I tried to touch his chest and about pushed my hand through. Nora still gaped at the image of her husband standing behind her, his blue-tinged face hushed and attentive, his hollow chest glaring at her with an emptiness she couldn't fathom. It didn't really seem to bother him, though, and that was what confused her most. I'm afraid I wasn't any better. That's what I wanted to tell you. How weren't you any better? And Nora squinted up at Misericordia. Well, you must have known I've not been myself these years, how I let myself go, how I didn't feel the need to keep myself presentable anymore. Not that I desired anyone or anything, mind you. It was just the demands of work had me down. Of course, we haven't spoken beyond a few greetings over the years, and as you were never a customer, never needed any visions or tinctures, you couldn't know my life and my needs. Why would anyone need something from the dead? Everyone needs something, dear. And after today, after seeing your husband, I know there are higher needs that are sorted out too. Sorted. Well, meted, I suppose that's the phrase. The higher needs are meted out and administered in their time. And that was why you saw Holly? That was why he gave me something. Nora sat up from the tree as Miss Misery leaned in, setting the candle in the grass between them. What did he give you? Chapter 2. Holly felt the current of air and the current of song and the current of water moving through him as first he expanded into the infinite depth of existence before contracting into the familiar shape of his body. He reached up and his eyes were still empty sockets, his chest still gaped with a hand-sized hole, and his lips were cracked. Whenever he touched his lips, now that his passion had been spooled off by that woman, he felt the rough edge against his finger. That curious woman in the woods, Misericordia. Of course he'd done business with her at the track, buying tinctures and medicine for the horses when he was starting out for Mr. Marvin, hoping to race one day for one of the stable owners, maybe even Mr. Geddes himself. And now he couldn't help thinking he still wanted to kiss her after seeing her lips plump up like rose petals when they'd met on his soggy walk home. She'd just been waiting on top of the ridge, he muttered, and ran his fingers along his lips. One moment she stood in rags and twine, covered in leaves and dirt from rummaging about in the brush, and the next she was kissing him. He'd stood dumbfounded as a silver liquid like mercury hung in a long strand from his mouth. She'd spooled it, he recalled, and held his finger up as if he could still see it, as all his most delicate words appeared and receded in the luminous thread. She just smiled as she did it, as all those rags she wore shifted into something smoother. Her long brown bangs shook out too, as her lips plumped up into a flowery softness. And another flare of wonder sparked in his mind, remembering it. And in that way he knew she hadn't taken all his passion. He still felt a faint stirring to be touched. But there was no shame in him for thinking such thoughts, and he smiled to know his wife had taken that remorse from him. Nora, he said, and saw her that last time standing in the kitchen. She must have felt his ghostly presence because she dropped her broom and shivered when he said her name. He just went fishing is all, she said, in that damn leaky boat. Her hair was wrapped up in a bun, and as she touched the pin pulling it out, her voice echoed against the ceiling. Thanks.
Okay, Doyle, thank you. This is the book At the Confluence. And my goodness, what an incredible reading. Thank you for sharing with us. And I hope that everyone tuning in now and later goes and you can get it from the April Gloaming shop. We're going to move on now. Next up, we have Bernadette Geyer, who is the author of the poetry collection, What Haunts Me, which just came out last week. I also was just able to finish this one, and I've got to say there's an invitation implicit to this work to confront our many identities that we move throughout a lifetime, and the details are startling, but it ultimately confronts these with a clarity that is tender while being faithful to our humanity, and the resolution offered in this is quite comforting. Bernadette Geyer is the author of The Scabbard of Her Throat and editor of My Cruel Intention, a contemporary poetry anthology. A writer of poetry and prose, her works have appeared widely in publications including Bennington Review, Salamander, Barrow Street, Oxford American, Westerly, and elsewhere. A longtime resident of Northern Virginia, Geyer now lives in Berlin, Germany, where she moved with her family in 2013. Her translations of poems by German writers have been published in Asymptote and the Massachusetts Review. Here's a review of What Haunts Me by Cynthia Marie Hoffman, author of Exploding Head. The true ghost of what haunts me is a kind of pre-haunting, an elegy of anticipatory grief, propelled as much by a poet's urgency to witness radiance as it happens, as by a woman's desire, as daughter, teacher, wife, mother, to document her family's life and lineage. It took years, she says, to appreciate the preservation process, the faint popping of jars like airless metallic kisses. This collection sweeps across geography and time, from childhood in a small steel plant town to adulthood traveling through Europe, all while reckoning with mortality. After a loss, we are tasked with sorting through the tchotchke spirits left behind. But the idea of inheritance is here more often attuned to Geyer's larger awareness of our human connectedness with the natural world. Like a red fox encountered herein, whose gaze contained the history of the woods, the poems in What Haunts Me offer an unexpected solace, a talisman against the specter of forgetting. We welcome now, with great thanks, Bernadette Geyer.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And I am going to start with the first poem in the collection, which I do think addresses this sort of approach to finding how we are linked with our pasts. This is Kinship. The koi thread underwater paths, steer themselves between one then another of the fountains, domesticated within the confines of the concrete pond. The gray-green water reflects a glass and steel sky. Their razored fins barely surface as they slip through small maelstroms of bubbles, sloughing their spines to reveal gold-orange flash and milky tumescence. What have we done to deserve this kinship with fish? Do we all simply multiply and divide, savoring the whirlpool jet spray on our taut backs, surfacing now and again amid the froth of a cunning heaven? How can we tell the koi we know, we understand? I am descended from fish. My ancestors are ghost javelins, their lithe bodies a promise. Pardon me. So the next poem is a multi-part poem that addresses a lot of the themes in the collection. It's called A Failed Romanticism. 1. The roots of silk cotton trees draped the slumberous doorways of Angkor Wat's Ta Prohm Temple. And for a while, the photogenic ruins were left that way for the sake of tourists eager to outdo each other in the framing and commodification of the sublime. Ruin is, after all, in the eyes of the beholder. In this case, the scholars who, as a concession to the general taste for the picturesque, deemed Ta Prohm the temple best merged with the jungle, but not yet to the point of becoming a part of it. neither nature nor man having bested the other in this perfect example. And so it was saved from further deterioration, preserved in figurative amber. 2. When we selected the 800-year-old Wood Spring Priory for our summer vacation, we told the children it was a castle. And to them, it just as well could have been, perception being everything when you are young. Priory to farmhouse, farmhouse to ruin, ruin to holiday rental for 2 families with kids. Nothing that lives so long can expect to retain a single identity. I myself have been daughter, teacher, wife, mother. Grazed by our careless shoulders, the narrow plastered halls in the priory chipped further, ghosting our sleeves. Our midnight trips to the kitchen further challenged by the uneven treads of the helixed stone stairwells. And we relished it all, photographed ourselves against the backdrop of crumbling walls that once defined a cloister, winced as the low lintels struck and left on our foreheads impressions that we'd recount for years. 3. But to prove not all shambles are so revered, so pictorial and preserved, the wagon wheel bar disappeared a mere 12 years after it closed, after it had served as the ruin to many, become ruin itself, the surrounding trees and brush unrepentant in their creep and slither. We'd grown used to the sight of the bar's apologetic slump against the eroding hillside across the river from the Clairton Still Works, landmarks we passed on the way to the home of my childhood. It is likely that no one had ever called it picturesque, though perhaps at closing time the view of the mill lights reflected on the river beyond the parking lot and across the train tracks gave patrons the impression of a world turned topsy-turvy so that the coal and slag barges could slumber among the stars. 4. Once I imagined returning to our own version of Angkor Wat, our grass gone unmown and ivy lewdly fingering the brick and siding of our temporarily abandoned home, finally reclaimed by the woods that were raised in the 1960s for this development of split levels and mock colonials, cul-de-sacs, and carports. On the plane ride home, I'd wondered what insects we'd find colonizing the corners of our pantry shelves, the ants at last discovering the honey I'd bought to sweeten my bitter brews. Could I come to love this home and embrace its shortcomings the way I'd made peace with the cold Castello de Montegaffoni I thought would provide inspiration for my writing one summer, accept the gaps in our bricks' crumbling mortar the way I'd accepted the splintered wood shutter I'd used to keep out the Tuscan night? It was August, when what has been abandoned falls prey to whatever has learned to survive despite itself. The crabgrass that crab walks its way across what's left when the parched lawn gives itself up as a gray-brown ash blown into the panting tongues of sedum leaves, a dust the scant rains of late summer can't wash off. And while a part of me knew that we'd been on vacation for only 2 weeks, and that the pest control guy was scheduled to come the first Friday we were away, and the lawn guys on the Friday after that, there was a deeper part of me that wanted to return to ruin, that wanted to know the magnitude of the necessity of our daily presence. 5. This house, whose walls we skim coat and paint, whose fence we mend and whose mortar we seal, whose photographed before we meticulously place beside its corresponding and utterly improved after. Another theme that runs throughout the collection, what haunts me, are the things that are not only passed down to us, but that are also passed down to others, that we pass down to our children. So this is explaining cremation to our daughter at the dinner table. 1. We explain the fire and what it leaves behind. 2. I don't even remember how the subject of the cat's ashes came up, how we still needed to figure out what to do with them. As she reached for her milk, our daughter said she wanted to see the box that held what remained. 3. In Paradise Lost, when the archangel's sword struck Lucifer, Milton wrote, "Then Satan first knew pain." That terrible thing, first knowledge, that burden. And now, as parents, my husband and I are tasked to pass down these burdens to our daughter. 4. That day, she didn't understand until she had searched the house herself, poked her doubting fingers into the wounds left behind, and finally understood that he was not there, would never again be there. She threw herself onto the sofa and sobbed, refusing to look at me as I set my hand on her back, as if it could draw the grief away, as if I had room to accept it. 5. What it comes down to is how soon we each fall from ignorance. 6. There are days when I curse Schrödinger because now every time I look at that box on my office shelf, its polished sheen and gold engraving, I know, damn it, I know. And because we are coming up on Halloween, I've got a couple of ghost poems that I'll wrap up with. Before the blessing. I would lie still, trying not to hear the walls and their sepia whispers, my face turned into the pillow to avoid smelling the oak breath of the house flaunting its speakeasy past. The shifting joint of wall and ceiling chanted my name as attic crawl spaces knocked their way into my dreams, waking me with their persistence. On my way downstairs, the wooden banister clutched at my wrist, an old woman hissing, "Listen to my story." And my final poem is actually the final poem from the collection, and it contains the reference to the title. Ghost, I remember. Ghost, I remember the rotten plum color of that carpet in my room. Every splinter cold snick of ice under my nails as I scraped winter from the inside of my windows. Some days I schemed to conjure you, but then recanted while my numb fingers fumbled a plastic rosary, pitted one form of belief against another. I trained my newly pierced ears to hear night whisper its vulgar gossip into the dusty folds of the curtains, but refused to confirm with open eyes any shifting shapes in the shadows. I learned to doubt, and then I left. At times I return to that house with my daughter, whose future I am tasked to shape with knowledge and faith, but shape instead by my lack of both. Ghost, there is no need now for you to scuff and pace and ache these loose board floors. No need to spook the watch hands backwards, because now You are the least of what daily haunts me. So, thank you so much. Hope
Thank
you
you.
enjoyed.
Oh my goodness. We enjoyed Bernadette, Geyer, everyone. Thank you so much. That thread of ghosts and haunting, it is so timely, and it runs through all of these works as it happens. We are next moving on to our third and final author reading with us this evening before we move into the literary discussion segment. Our final reader tonight is Ashley N. Roth. She's author of the novel We Never Took a Bad Picture, which came out earlier this year in March. In fact, was referred to as a literary tour de force by Independent Book Review. Ashley Ann Roth is a Nashville-based writer, educator, and performer. Her writing has appeared in Moonsick Magazine, Literary Orphans, Crack the Spine, Jersey Devil Press, and elsewhere, with her short story Adolescent earning a Pushcart nomination. Her multimedia work has also appeared in various exhibits, including the Flying Toaster video, an art exhibit dedicated to the 1990s, Bowiescapes, and Art All Night in Trenton, New Jersey. When not writing, she can be found revamping www.ashleynroth.com, starring in campy music videos alongside her husband, or perfecting vegan pastries with her 10-year-old daughter. And I will tell you, once you have read her book, that will certainly carry through as well. We Never Took a Bad Picture synopsis. It's been 30 years since the Joyces made a final pact to save their failing marriage. Gloria Joyce knows the anniversary party she's planning is more than a celebration. It's a crack in the promise she made to her husband after losing their teenage son. Artie has spent decades retreating into the mundane and orderly world of his grocery store to avoid facing the choices he made as a father and husband. Will the party finally force him to confront the past or shatter the only routines holding him together? When their estranged daughter Autumn returns, she is forced to navigate the strained relationship with her mother and own daughter, along with the festering guilt surrounding the role she played in her baby brother's untimely death. As the party looms nearer, the family faces new tragedies, forcing the Joyces to confront what they've buried beneath decades of curated memories and a crafted veneer. With timelines and voices that weave seamlessly between decades, We Never Took a Bad Picture explores the curation of memories and legacies, intergenerational complexities, and the quiet battles fought behind closed doors. And I'm going to say myself that the book ranges from brilliant and joyful to searing restraint to cathartic kicks and perfect descriptions such as, like the Errol Flynn of the grocery store. It is my great pleasure to welcome now, and thank you so much for joining and reading with us tonight, Ashley N. Roth.
Thank you so much. Like Christopher, mine too is a braided narrative between the past and the present. So I'm going to read from three of the family members as they're all telling the story of their family and their relationship to one of their own's death 30 years prior. So we'll start with Artie. This is when you first meet him. Artie had a love-hate relationship with his workplace traditions. He loved pushing through the automatic doors before the store was open, knowing the exact moment there would be a burst of fake rain showering the produce wet wall. He loved the recorded thunder that played right before the spouts exploded over the romaine, kale, and 2 types of parsley. Artie appreciated his own attention to detail, the way he rotated the apples so their best sides faced the customers, and the way he arranged the bananas in a visual representation of the ripening process, from bright green to bruised soft black. He enjoyed wiping the damp plastic packages of cut fruit. There was comfort in the smiles of familiar cashiers and even in the quivering of new hires who so desperately wanted to make the best impression. Artie eagerly listened for the symphony of registers beeping after the store was officially open. He strained his ears until they rang, searching for the chorus of genuine hellos and have a good days singing through the aisles. Artie never tired of hearing a case of paper bags hitting the waxed LVT floor with a muffled thud. That wasn't entirely true. Even Artie had the occasional bad day where he didn't welcome the sounds and interactions of his daily life. Sometimes he was simply tired of them. And on the bleakest and rarest of days, he hated the mechanical repetition, the carousel of every day being the same. But he always needed the routine, the sameness, even on those days. Artie thrived inside his grocery castle, marching toward his quiet office space housed behind the dairy cooler and the receiving area, weaving between the gruff talk of backstock workers, the smell of rotting spoilage, advancing with authority toward the temp and inventory logs his employees were always scrambling to fill out before the health department made their unannounced visits. Artie's mere footsteps sent employees scurrying to find a working pen, rushing to calibrate broken thermometers. That's when he came alive. At Allen's Market, Artie was the go-to man, the father with all the answers. Every question, every concern, every decision needed his attention. He was the final word. He reigned here where everything happened exactly as and when it should. Everything was mapped out quarterly, yearly, weekly, exactly as it was supposed to be. The repetition, the routine, it meant he was doing everything right. It meant he was succeeding. It also meant Joan Allen continued to do everything right. She walked into his office on the first workday of the new year with a stack of projections, pretending to talk business. This was her routine, as was her spiked coffee and deep conversations disguised as casual office chit-chat. If she didn't come in prying and cloaking her whiskey breath with chewed-up breath mints, Artie might believe the backstock gossip of Joan coming down with old lady senility. Joan was the biggest comfort inside Allen. She still wore outdated suits and shoulder pads. She still soaked her chest with stale Chanel. She still got her hair set at the beauty parlor and asked the stylist for the same unflattering shade of muted auburn. Allen's had evolved and warped under the advances of technology and food trends, but Joan remained a relic, preserved in a time Artie never allowed himself to admit he missed. That's the first bit. And then this is a little later in the novel when they're now planning said anniversary party. It was in the synopsis. And Gloria is going through her photos. And nobody's talked about Teddy since he has died. And so she's now shaken things up. Gloria hovered over the dining table where all the old photo albums lay like loose bricks. The first step was getting the albums out of the closet. She'd been thinking about that first step ever since that Saturday. Teddy's name had resurfaced into the universe and the world hadn't imploded. It was almost as if remembering him was completely normal and innocuous. Even so, she was going through the other albums first, one step at a time. She left the living room TV on low volume for comforting white noise. She could barely hear the round table of famous women arguing over current events as she peeled back another vintage plastic sheath. Gloria tugged at her snapshot from its sticky skin, exposing a new, precious memory to scalding sunlight and starving bacteria. Gloria churned every family picture through the same painstaking process. She held them by their edges, gelatin ridges examined, another forgotten face or moment dissected. The newest one she balanced gingerly across her fingers was from Artie's birthday party in 1971, a moment snared in time with a mustard yellow veneer and the look of the times, limp, shaggy hair, a fat mustache, a shirt strategically unbuttoned to reveal a few curls of dark chest hair. Gloria tried to remember the entire day, not just the moment captured. Artie's mouth a purse zero as he blew out 26 candles, and behind him a map of yellow wallpaper with the soft bumps nobody ever noticed. She remembered the tantrum Artie threw when he tried to paste the wallpaper up himself. The cake in the picture was slathered with thick whipped white frosting, but Gloria couldn't recall the cake's flavor. Spongy angel food, dense chocolate. Maybe it was gooey fruit slid between sheets of yellow cake. That had been Artie's mother's favorite. Gloria hated that cake. She always gagged on the mushy, bloated strawberries that reminded her of phlegm. That disgusting dessert was most likely the exact cake in the picture. In fact, Dorothy Joyce had probably insisted she be the one to make Artie's cake, shooing Gloria from her own kitchen and taking over. Gloria pressed her hands to the table, forcing her mouth to regurgitate a 40-year-old taste. It didn't have to be Dorothy's cake. Gloria held the picture in her own hands in her house, and Dorothy was dead. Gloria could decide the cake was chocolate and that she had made it, that she had lit every single tiny waxy candle and sang to Artie the loudest. It was her memory, her family album. She could even say she had sung in perfect pitch, and everyone would have to believe her. Gloria took the pen from her notebook where she was drawing out storyboards of photo montages. On the back of Artie's birthday picture, she wrote, Artie's 26. chocolate cake made by Gloria. Then she took the picture and added it to the stack designated to all the other arty moments from the 1970s. Organizing photographs and scribbling out visual design was the first bit of party planning Gloria had gotten to do since booking the venue back in mid-January. She'd starved off nearly 20 pounds with a version of Denise's paleo, slathering her vegetables in cold-pressed avocado oil, the same oil her thick strips of fatty bacon crackled in. Gloria didn't think she'd easily tire of steak and eggs, but looking at all the photos from the carb-loving past was making her realize how much she missed pasta and soft, fresh bread. She marveled over a blurry casserole from the next page in the album when a photo slipped free and landed in her lap. Teddy. He was 5 and wearing that bright red hat she'd bought to match his T-ball uniform. He loved the hat as much as he hated the ball flying toward him. In the picture, he stood in short grass and smiled big enough to reveal his first lost tooth. Gloria's chest throbbed. Simply looking at him now, she was yanked into that moment and could feel his tiny fingers, the thick cotton of his striped shirt, the squishiness of his knees when she pressed a Band-Aid into an imaginary injury. He loved Band-Aids. Gloria sat down, one step at a time. And then one more small section. This is from their daughter, Autumn, who believes she is responsible for her brother's death. And this is just a very, very small little curiosity-inducing snippet, hopefully. The second part of the exhibit was a narrow hallway shrouded in amber light. Autumn held her breath, her head swimming with trapped air. She scurried down the hall, noticing the pores of tiny speakers studded into the wall. A voiceless, distorted loop of the Velvet Underground's heroine gargled as Autumn walked faster down the hall's slender throat. The loop was a part of the song that always made her anxious, the fast part that sounded just like waiting for the needle felt, a feeling that made her queasy and nostalgic and thirsty all at once. The hallway seemed to squeeze around her. At its end, a sheer black curtain woven with fishing wire and sequin thread, webbing out the words heroin chic. Autumn pushed aside the curtain, stumbling into the show's core, a room with 4 directions and clogged with a type that often frequented these sorts of openings, the kind of people Autumn could never understand. Former urchins of gritty, slimy subculture matured into some sort of high fashion. Snooty punk rockers wearing tailored leather and out-of-print pins, asymmetrical razored haircuts softened with Olaplex, fishnets and tulle and jeans ripped on purpose. Autumn got the notion of places like the Scream, the Rainbow, and CBGB having a look. She just didn't get the pompous veneer that seemed to ferment by going to more of these elite gatherings. Autumn started to slightly regret coming, still searching the crowd and still finding not one familiar face. She swiveled behind her to find a wallpaper of old posters washed in blinking black light, posters from LA. Autumn knew the rules about touching exhibits, but she still crossed over the tiny strip of blue masking tape and felt the pimpled paper as if she could transport herself back to those places, to the carefree dancing and yelling over bad sound and finding it funny that someone noticed she had a ring of white crust around her nose. Autumn pressed harder on the posters, the wall, running her fingers down the seams before she found one that almost sent her spinning. The Scream, 1988. She only read one of the bands listed before turning sharply into the next display and telling herself it was only a coincidence. And that is it.
Ashley and Roth, thank you. Thank you. And I do want to invite all of our listeners to become readers. Certainly, each of these books, seeing them through to fruition is so satisfying, specifically the scene that Ashley was just reading through. You absolutely want to see where that goes. That was We Never Took Bad Picture by Ashley and Roth. Before that, we were so fortunate to hear What Haunts Me from Bernadette Geyer. We started out our evening with At the Confluence by Christopher K. Doyle. 3 magnificent titles from April Gloaming Publishing. We will be opening up the floor now with all of these delightful authors to entertain conversation. We want it to be free-flowing for our audience, whatever platform you're streaming on. We've got some questions to get us started. Thank you, and please add to those. We should have time for just a few more and would love to hear from you and what you would like to hear from these authors. All 3 of them, their books are in some way dedicated to the preservation of moments, and in keeping with the season, ghostly melodies drift through each of your pieces. We would like to start off by asking, and again, anyone jump in when you have an answer. Let's just keep this conversation open and flowing. What would you say the role of remembering the past or the past itself has in your writing specifically? And what is the role of past in storytelling, either through prose or poetry? So we're considering memory and how that has carried through your work, and perhaps if you want to discuss even how that is currently manifesting, not just in these books.
Here, I guess I will jump. I feel like memory in itself is almost its own like fiction, right? And I know not, I mean, it's its own literary art form because it changes, and sometimes the way you remember something, you could have the exact same event to somebody else and you'll remember it differently. And I think that makes it really interesting to explore with characters, to have the same moment, the same things happening, but you get in different psyches and see how that's explored. And I heard that, oh my gosh, and you guys were so fabulous.
Yeah, that's almost like different perspectives also, right? So the same moment or same event, like you're talking about, Ashley, seen from a couple of different characters' point of view. What did they notice? What did they remember? Because it's all different from each perspective.
I know I have always been fascinated not only by the the action of forgetting or remembering in humans, but also a few of the poems in my collection kind of take the imagination of what objects remember. Like the one poem is like the foot remembers the favorite shoe, and kind of putting myself in the mindset of like how objects may retain memories of their own.
Which that's Bernadette. I feel like that's actually what I'm always thinking about, whether it was this book or anything else. So Alzheimer's is very prevalent in my family. And so that's always been a thing of thinking about like how, and the things that you will remember when you're in the throes of that disease is you will remember things from 30 years ago, 40 years ago, but something that happened last week. And sometimes even there will be like a layer of the past over the present and over the past as well. But I think that the object, that was kind of the whole thing is, everybody's like, well, what sparked the story? I'm like, well, it was kind of the family photo album. Like my family, both sides of my family do a really great job of like saving photos. I don't know if that's my family or if it's every family prior to like the 21st century, and I try to make sure I print things out so that my kid can see like, these are actual photos, not just like a phone grid.
Yeah. My mom is usually sending by email pictures of photographs that she looks through. We have boxes and boxes of old photos, and that also kind of really carries through like my own writings, is just this idea of how we will be remembered. And photographs are so important, and before the advent of digital cameras and everybody having a camera on their phone, photos were few and far between. That it was like a special occasion to have a photo taken. So they're very significant.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating, the way that each of you move through these layers of perspectives, whether that's the perspective of a photograph that's been curated, or you're visiting the perspectives of each of the characters that you get to know through your stories and poetry. There's also the body parts, as you brought up, Bernadette. That's fascinating to me, the memory that's retained in each of the body parts. And it seemed to me to be a theme that each of you explored in your work. I noticed a common thread of the way that pain tethers us to the bodies while it urges us to evacuate them. There's an embodiment of memory, a Frankenstein type quality to these memories as you're flipping through them, and these recollections of the body that are tactile. it's interesting how we can hear and feel stories in different parts of our body. And I was wondering if there was anything specifically about the embodiment of these stories that you would like to offer up. I can let that one set with you, and we can go to this question from the audience that has come in too, which is always lovely to hear about the inception. And this was posed specifically to Chris. However, we want to open up the floor to anyone. Pop in with your ideas. Where does the universe you create begin? Do you start with a character, a scene?
For At the Confluence, I grew up near Harper's Ferry, and every summer I go with some friends and we sit in the river and hang out right where the novel takes place. So this last August when we went, I was telling folks, I'm like, you guys are sitting right in my novel right now. So it was really easy for me for this one because I really wanted to write about kind of the energy that's there. And we talk about braided narratives. These two things coming together are really interesting because you can play off them. You can see, like we're talking about, different perspectives from each side, how they bleed over to each other. And so this one kind of started with that setting, and that it's its own universe already. So that it was kind of an easy one for me.
And I think that even we're talking about what the body parts having memory, but also like place has memory, but then we also can have very different memories of place. And every like states almost have an identity and regions have an identity. But I feel like that if you're from a place, you have like you may have a totally different identity than somebody looking from the outside too. And so that's, yeah, I've not been to Harper's Ferry. My husband's from West Virginia, so I've been to several other parts, but never Harper's Ferry.
Well, you got to go now.
Yes, I have to go to the novel spot.
Very important part of our country's history as well.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, it's close by. So, yeah. I don't get any kickbacks from Harper's Ferry tourists for that.
Just the inspiration, right?
To try, I should approach them maybe.
Bernadette, would you like to share with us anything about the way place has informed your work, or?
Yeah, I guess I do get, you had mentioned a bit about like traveling being a very inspirational thing, and you know, Christopher talking about being in a place. And so yes, I always find myself inspired when I travel. And I might just kind of take notes while I'm there of observations, and then those will like resurface, you know, months or years later, and find linkages to something that I'm thinking about or something else that I'm working on, and it kind of gets sucked into the black hole of the poem, and you know, gets merged with everything. And I find the ways that they tie in together.
Yeah.
When I always think it's funny too, I don't know about you, Bernadette, but Chris, you were writing about Harper's Ferry, where you're originally from, but you don't live there. I kind of wrote, I mean, I couldn't, like, it wasn't a love letter to, you know, the West Coast, but there were all these spots of Southern California that I had to like infuse all their little bits and all their identities. And Bernadette, you're in Berlin now. So does your collection kind of cover the places that you did live before and Berlin? Or
it's interesting because most of the poems in this collection were written like very a bit longer ago. So you know, like some of them are, you know, even 20 or more years old. I have a lot more newer poems that are influenced by Berlin, but actually the poems in What Haunts Me deal a lot with my first trip to Warsaw, because my family background on my father's side is Polish. So my maiden name is unpronounceable by most people except Eastern Europeans. And so yes, a lot of the poems deal more with Warsaw and my experience traveling to Poland as someone who grew up, you know, with nobody knowing how to pronounce my name, and then seeing my name everywhere because my name is very close. My maiden name is very close to the Polish word for book. And so like every bookstore I had to take a picture of, and it was just like, yes, this is, these are my people kind of thing. But yeah, it really hit me. But then I didn't actually write about it until years later. It's just kind of thinking about that tie-in between, you know, my family and the history, and just the idea of names and photographs. So it just, like that poem also, but because I can't properly pronounce most of the words and phrases that I have in that poem, I decided not to read it today. um, but yeah, it really pulls in a lot of this idea of places and how we relate to places, and how our families, and like photographs of us at places. It's a whole jumble of all of the themes, like all pulled into one poem.
I love that.
I'm seeing a request pop up specifically to talk about your inherited history, Bernadette.
Oh gosh, well, I mean, we all have the things that we inherit, and there are 2 poems in the collection. The collection actually used to be originally called The Inheritance, but then there turned out to be a lot of other books called The Inheritance. So I had to, I kept coming up with new names. But there's His Inheritance, which is a poem about what was passed down to my husband from his father. And then there's a poem called My Inheritance, which talks a bit about the things that my father always jokes about, the archives that they're collecting for me and my sisters. Just all the things that we will inherit that are in the attic in boxes, and every so often, you know, one gets sent to us in a care package. And, you know, not everything is like of real, like there are definitely the things that are of historic family value, things when an aunt passes away or when a grandparent passes away. But then there are things like a clear plastic umbrella that I had when I was, you know, 7 years old. So these are the things that I think about when I think about inheritance. It's, you know, but not only the things that we inherit, but the beliefs, the you know, the work ethic. You know, if people talk about work ethics, the the love of gardening. I have, everywhere I've moved, I've brought my family's love of gardening with me, and you know, I have my balcony garden, and I have always tried and somewhat had modicums of success growing gardens, but nothing beats my parents' garden. So like, you know, just inheriting all the family things that come down, but then there are the things that are passed down to you that, you know, you may just leave that to the side, because not everything is going to be compatible with your life as it is now.
I feel like that package is like symbolic, because it's almost like, you know, when you get this package, you'll have this really cool thing. And even the plastic umbrella, you might look like, oh my gosh, remember when I was like 8 and I, you know, I had this plastic umbrella? Like I had a frog umbrella, and I wish I knew where it was, because I think about him all the time. But it's like we get this box and you'll get all these little treasures, but then you also get the like oops, there's like, actually, gosh, when my one grandfather had passed away, we all went down to Alabama. So he was from Portland, but he was living in Alabama, and we're like going through his stuff, and we found these like very personal, like almost journal entries. And we we're all like, I don't think we're supposed to be reading this. But then you also realize the emotional weight that he had been experiencing in his own. And it's like you never thought he was very stoic, and kind of it's funny in my book, like all these men, the stoicism. But it's like the lack of, that emotions there. They just have been taught through generation upon generation, like put your energy into work and money and that's it. And then you retire. And now you're like, who am I?
Yeah. My grandfather on my mother's side was actually quite an amazing writer and visual artist. And when I got to know him was when he was already an older stoic man who had worked many years in the steel mill. And so to have my grandmother and mother share with me some of the writings that they have of his when he was traveling in Europe during World War II was quite amazing, just because just these beautiful descriptions. And I only knew him as, grandpa.
Yeah.
who would, yell at us, you kids, be quiet.
I am so interested in hearing about the recurrence of memories, whether that is carrying through the generations like this, or whether it's carrying a thread from place to place, something coming up again for you, being by a memento or by a smell, as ran through Chris's novel quite frequently. There are all these different trigger points, but then when we revisit a memory, also naturally, as Ashley was talking about, sometimes there is a recrafting that happens, and we tend to edit it every time we go back. And in your book, she's talking about how she can tell it any way she wants, and you just have to believe because it's her story she's telling. So there's that beautiful power inherent to that. But then there's also the haunting quality, right? This recurrence of memory that keeps nibbling at you, asking perhaps for some part to be solved or answered. So in that vein, the three of you use not only the past, but the way the past emerges is usually in a sort of haunt. Can you all elaborate on this use of haunt, and why is that important in your writing and in modern writing at large, specifically in this season?
Everything is fragments now, so I feel like that's also fragments of haunting, right? So that's how I look at it. I usually don't write about the present day, so I like to write about the past or set it in the past because I find it more nuanced. Less is known. There's more shadows. Not everything's in your face 24/7. So I like that aspect of things that are shadowed and not always known. So fragments, haunting.
I've always been obsessed with the past. I feel like it was funny because I teach high school, and I feel like kids, and maybe it's just the teens that I'm seeing, are not as obsessed with the past. Like I was, obsessed with silent movies and everything before. I mean, even the decade in which I was born, but I was so obsessed with all these things that I feel like in the past is so, like, if you look at fashion, it's always calling to the past, and I feel like a lot of kids like are not, because they're seeing so much content and they don't know, and they can't really discern like the 60s from the 70s, or really honestly the 60s from like the 1760s. The other day we were talking to our kids, we're doing something about Civil War, and I was like, do you guys know when the Civil War ended? And almost my entire class said 1970 something, and I was like, oh, I didn't realize I was born that close. But I think it was because it just feels, it's like the 1900s. They say, oh, you're from the 1900s. I was like, well, I think 1900s. I think Gibson Girl and turn of the century, and like, but it's just this big swath, and I think everything is so constant. There's no time to like pause and reflect, and so I guess writing about the past, it's so important so we can preserve it.
Yeah. No, I would definitely agree with that. And pretty much a lot of what I write about the past is just to kind of figure out who I am now, and to remember where I've come from.
Mm.
Like the distance you get from, I think there's also, that the distance you can better, celebrate and, criticize.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and to look back at, not only your own past, but like the past of, your family, and see how that has progressed, and what obstacles did they have to overcome to get where they are now. The history of the place where I grew up, which was an old mill town. It would used to be, I mean, it was called Glassport, so like there was a big glass factory there for a while. But then when that was gone, then there was Westinghouse, but Westinghouse went away too. And then there was Tube City. Now Tube City is gone, and going back there is very difficult, because I do remember what it was like when I was little, and there was like an actual main street with shops, and not just the liquor store and the discount cigarettes, and the many bars. And to go back now, it's kind of sad. It's very sad to see where it has gone. So it's tough to write about the past, but I do feel like it just, oh gosh, yeah, the memories. But am I sugarcoating these memories? Like, maybe the town has always been like this, and it's just the types of shops have changed, but the town has always been like that. But I was a kid, so that was my world, and there was no internet, so I didn't know that there was any other life until I got older.
When do you guys think, I think because like sounds like we're all relatively nostalgic, but I think that there is also like you said, like sugarcoating it, there's kind of a danger in nostalgia. And that's kind of where a lot of the things that are happening right now that really kind of suck about, society, are because people are almost weaponizing like that nostalgia, like the good old days. And it's like, well, they weren't really good, but there is also a beauty. Everything's layered and everything is complicated, but, and I think that's the beauty of the beauty of retelling the memories like Gloria was doing, but it's also kind of almost like reflective of like what's happening right now. And it's like when they're wiping out a whole exhibit at Smithsonian and be like, this never happened. And so yeah.
And on that note, you're touching on another one of our questions that deals with nostalgia. We have one that talks about nostalgia and the counterpart of regret. And it's interesting as we look at this arc through history as it meets us in the present moment, and all these iterations and the needful things and the not so needful. How do regret and nostalgia play in your writing? What is their importance in storytelling, in poetry or prose? How are you able to write about them with such great effect? And I would also add, do you sense an inherent, as you were bringing up and touching on, Ashley, a responsibility or a best practices that you consider in your own practice?
Yeah, gosh, I mean, regret, like, it's, so I was looking at the different life cycles. I think it was Erickson with the different generations, and the very last one is integrity or despair. And it's kind of like, hey, are you like proud of the life that you lived? And that's, of course, if you live to that category of human existence, or are you regretful? And I think everybody's regretful about something. But when we talk about the different, so the characters, yes, definitely. And I think looking back on the past, you're going to have that juxtaposition of regret and reinventing, right? But I think even like as we talk about places having identities, like what about like our country or culture? Like, is it regretting what it's doing? Like, I mean, with AI, like, people are like, oh, work's been made easier, but it's also literally like wiping away art. I saw a statistic the other day. It was talking about in 1980 that 60% of American adults read for fun. Now it's less than 20. And so, through all these things that can be good and that can be helpful, it's like our, is the identity, is our country or just, not even beyond this country is, are we having enough regret?
you want to write about people's characters' wants, their needs, their desires, and not all those are realized, right? So they become regrets, and that's the meat of your character a lot of the times. That's what gives your writing tension and interest, right? You don't want to. There's not too many books about someone everything great goes for, right? So regrets really play into that because stuff isn't attained or there's a struggle, right? So that's why a lot of regrets are written about, I think, are important.
Oh yeah, spirit of the staircase in all of our written works. Yes. We had a question from the audience, and we had mentioned earlier how in Chris's novel there are some delightful grotesqueries, and I want to relate what draws you all to writing about the grotesque. Each of you have gotten into the nitty gritty of perhaps the body or human experience. So we are confronting now and considering the element of the grotesque at work in your work.
Hmm. I don't even know the definition of grotesque. I probably looked it up at some point, but I just like to write about stuff that's interesting. Um, I think for writers, you don't have to like my work. You don't have to dislike it, but if it's interesting, that is fantastic. So I think that might be why, like in my book, there are eyes that come out of someone's face, but there's no gore or anything associated with that. So it's more of an artistic choice to make it interesting. And I don't know why that happened. And I try not to think about it. I just want to write and make stuff that's interesting that I'm interested in. And if I examine it too much, then I'm not having fun.
And there's an unflinching quality to each of your narratives as you relate them that draw attention to points where other people might choose to look away. And yet you're able to disarm the reader and introduce these concepts in a way where we can confront them, which is at times cathartic and at times, leaves us with quite a bit more to think about. So yeah, I do want to invite some more discussion about moving through that process of confronting these more unsavory, perhaps, elements or troublesome.
I mean, I definitely think I definitely touched upon obviously gritty just of the underbelly of the suburban life, right? But and it was such I think looking at the 60s and the 50s as kind of when Artie and Gloria met is supposed to be this time that we really really sugarcoat. Like it was so perfect and the American life, the suburban white picket fence, and one of the most, I guess, classically grotesque scenes is Gloria in the book suffers from many a pregnancy trauma, many a miscarriage. And there's one pretty graphic scene, that if there's going to be a trigger warning, a content warning, here it is. But I also think that especially in an era like that, if you gave birth, you couldn't have anybody else in there with you. And even when you would give birth, if you did breastfeeding, they'd be like, here's a clamp so you can get rid of it because we don't want you to do that because it's bodily fluid, and I think that obvious, but that at the same time, in the 60s, in the 50s, in the 40s, women suffered miscarriages and they had pregnancy traumas and they had all these things, but it was something you could not talk about. And so I think really making at least that scene and all the other ones really kind of where you can't look away and you maybe want to look away, I think that is really important too.
I do want to hear. Yes.
I can't really think of any of my poems in the current collection that deal with the grotesque, and it's not that I shy away from it. The topics kind of present how they want to be written, and I have not. Did you find one that's grotesque?
I do have one to share.
Really? Okay.
Right. And then yes, I do want to hear from it. I could tell you were a little hesitant about this one, so I'll offer. The bullet-pocked wall would never apologize for its blemishes as we skimmed our fingertips over its marred but proud skin.
Okay, yeah. And that too that's also a very history-laden poem. And yes, in that war is grotesque. yes, there's a lot of, a lot of when I was touring around Warsaw and seeing, this was this was probably about 24 years ago, that I was in Warsaw, and, moving also like the first time I moved, the first time I visited Berlin was in 1999. So only, 10 years after the fall of the wall. And like, you just see bullet pocked walls everywhere in Europe. And, that's a constant reminder, of the history of the place and the history of the peoples. And yeah, so I'm glad you found that, Christine. Because I don't, I guess I have sort of my own idea of what I think of grotesque. I think of bodily grotesque.
Oh, yes, certainly that too. Yeah.
More in the ways of like eyes,
Yeah.
being removed from a body.
Mm.
But
Yeah. Yeah. Or for instance, in Ashley's novel, there is a scene of drug use that comes up rather unexpectedly with a character that you wouldn't necessarily expect that to come up with. And it is interesting how in the banal and in the mundane moments, something like this can break through and shock everyone to their core. It happens not always in the dark corners, it happens where you wouldn't expect it, where everything, whether we knew it was a facade or not, or, yes, the grotesqueries of a body, whether that is our own or a home, being bullet pocked.
Mm-hmm.
With that one, that had personal resonance to me. There was a bullet that went through the wall I'm looking at right now when a church bus was shot up across the street. And these things touch us in unexpected ways, and you never know exactly when you will find resonance in a writer being able to confront it, and you all have done so in such caring ways. And I want to thank you for that. It's transformative.
Thank you, Christine, for feeling what we're doing, and for having these really poignant like reflections on it.
I really enjoyed immersing myself in your work. And I love what April Gloaming is doing, amplifying the Southern holler. There is that chord that runs through each of yours, no matter where the location is, whether it's in California, whether we're on the Potomac, whether we're in Berlin, there is a spirit there that carries through each of you, which is so invigorating. And it's enlivening. I want to also approach, there was an idea I found current in each of your work, that we want our touch to in some way improve, not just ruin. So there is a power and a potency to what we do, not just with our physical touch, but what our work touches whom, perhaps. I would be interested to hear about, again, bringing up the idea perhaps of responsibility, but just more your relationship with the power of your touch to improve. Or what mark you would, like to leave, something like that. How you might want to see a touch be experienced.
It's probably so tough. I feel like as writers, imposter syndrome is such a prevalent thing amongst writers that it's, it's tough to think like, wait, people would read this and feel the same way I feel about the books that I love. It's kind of hard to fathom that. I mean, gosh, I want, do I want somebody to cry? Do I want somebody to maybe think about their own family? And maybe everybody has a complicated relationship with family, right? And I think that with this is to maybe pause and just think that like you may have experienced the family in one way, but so did, 3 generations back, or your sibling or your parent, and just to maybe pause and have empathy. I mean, doesn't always mean you have to have full forgiveness exactly, but empathy that everyone is coming from somewhere and experiencing something,
Yeah, I love that empathetic resonance. Yes, please.
As someone who read my book for the blurb, right, we got to do these blurbs. I really trust her, and she wrote to me that it's about hope and grief. And I hadn't realized that in writing it, right? So I guess I'd want people to be, everyone experiences grief, but there's also hope on the other side of that. So maybe this will help resonate with some folks about, I've experienced this horrible thing, but there's also some hope involved in it too.
And for me, I feel like in my poems, I'm always trying to seek out linkages across lands, across peoples, across time. And I would hope that anyone reading my works that it would maybe in some way help them also see or experience these kinds of linkages in their own lives.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Doorways into worlds that are also entry points for connection. Yes, each of you provide that in spades. I want to ask before we move on to our final question, was there anything more that each of you wanted to bring forth, whether that was personally or of each other?
I wanted to actually, Bernadette had brought up that the poem about the explaining cremation to your daughter, and it resonates for a couple of reasons. One, I lost my 17-year-old cat in 2018 while I first started writing this. And actually Teddy, the son who had died 30 years prior, didn't even exist until I was going through the loss of my cat. And my daughter was 4 at the time. And oh my gosh, when you're talking about your daughter searching, I remember like telling my daughter, and we were, and I don't have the language for death. I don't know fully, I understand what death is, but it's bigger than we can fully comprehend. And I was like, well, she's an angel. Let me give you a euphemism. And she was like, well, she grew wings and flew away. And she was like literally outside in the sky, like looking. And I remember I was so distraught. I had my kitty from 18 to 35. And she was like, Pandora, please come back and just fly back here so my mom will stop being so sad. And so I really, when you're reading that, I was like, oh my gosh, all the feelings coming back.
Yeah. Yeah. But thanks. It was a tough, it was a tough poem to write, to really kind of approach the emotion without being emotional. Because a lot of my poems are me kind of arguing with myself about, what I feel, what I believe, what I think, how I see the world, and then just, pulling in these things like, pulling in the quote from Paradise Lost, because it's these realizations and these learnings, like these first things that we learn, and then having to pass these first learnings to our children, and we're always learning new things no matter how old we get, and not everything we learn is a pleasant thing to learn. We have to prepare them for life, and life is not always pretty.
Yeah.
Here.
Sorry, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer or anything.
No. I was just sitting in that for a moment. I just want to absorb and we can be quiet for just a moment. We're keeping it flowing. It's just that's poignant, and I feel it. It's okay to take a moment. Sometimes, when you read each of your books too, you're like, okay, let me take a moment. These are 3 haunting works, as it happens, in the very best sense. So, we work through lots of great stuff, but what we want to know is what can we expect next from each of you? Tell us about any current projects or upcoming that you have going on.
I'm actually writing, I like these characters so much, I'm writing another book with them, and more characters, obviously. Set in a different time and later, actually closer to our present day, so that's exciting for me. I've made it to the 1970s in the next book, so that's a big step. That's a big step. It's a big jump for me.
Yeah. I cannot wait. I love the characters too.
1970s Baltimore.
Sweet Nora. Nice. All right.
Ashley,
so I have, I'm working on, it's funny because it's another one that's in the present looking at the past, and this time it's 6 former teen and child stars and who have been allegedly a part of, or they've been cursed, and that 4 of the 6 have all died tragically. Again, I think there's a theme, there's a motif in my stuff. But they now, one of the stars is confronting, having to come back and figuring out what the curse is all about. It's still drafting.
I'm watching and waiting. All right, Bernadette, let's hear it.
I kind of been going through a big creative spurt over the last couple of years. And so I've got like another manuscript that is, pretty much all the poems have been published from it. So I just need to kind of figure out how to package it and what it wants to be as a whole. And then I've got another series of poems that I'm working on, prose poems. And I tried starting short stories. I have, a few short stories I'm shopping around and essays. Like I kind of feel like I want to do all the things.
Magician scarf that keeps coming in all colors.
Well, I mean, not everything that I want to write about is a poem. So it's like, okay, well, that's an essay. All right, well, I'll write an essay now. And, this is not an essay. It's a short fiction. I want to write, I wrote a short story that one of the main characters is a bee. So like just, it was too big to be a poem. So I had to turn it into a short story.
Excellent. Yes, different forms serve others. It's great to be unencumbered. Sometimes it's fun to impose the strictures and get into the infinitesimal and see what pops out. But other times, just shrug off and let it be. Let it show itself to you. We are very excited to see what it is. Thank you. I am going to say that at this moment, we would like to thank you all so much for this enlightening conversation. I want to thank everybody who has tuned in live and who will tune in later to April Gloaming Publishing for bringing forth these great authors to share for all the works that are coming forward, which we anticipate. And let's see, you can tune in later on YouTube if you want. Of course, you can catch this again. You can take notes. There's a lot to unpack in this conversation that, I'm going to hold up the books one more time. Bernadette Geyer, What Haunts Me. We never took a bad picture, Ashley and Roth. At the Confluence, Christopher K. Doyle. Thank you, each of you. We want to encourage our listeners and readers. Don't forget to marvel at the beauty of the world. Maybe it'll inspire you to create something too. We hope you will be back with us next season. We will be here in 3 months on Sunday, January 25th. Again, thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you, Chris, Ashley, Bernadette. Fantastic hearing from you and speaking with you. I hope you have a beautiful evening.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you.
You too.
Thank you.